Hello, welcome back. BJ the Brave here, bringing you my updated meta snapshot. So if you watched this one 2 weeks ago, you'll know that I plan to basically do these every sort of 2 to 3 weeks to try and keep on top. And it's really to give you a glimpse into kind of what the meta is, what decks are being played, and put them into some sort of order. It's obviously heavily my perception, although I do engage with the community. So, you know, if I'm reaching out and talking to people, it's, you know, and you're one of those people, thank you so much. You know, it really helps me to sort of pull this together. Right, with that said, let's dive in. Dead simple. We got 4 tiers, tier 1 to 4, with 1 being the best. What I'm going to do is walk you through where I think each of the Warlord currently sits, and also give you some example deck lists as we go. Before we jump into that, just want to say a massive thanks to everybody who has subscribed. If you haven't yet, please consider following the channel, hit that sub button. Also, hit the like button below. It really helps me out, really appreciate it. And if you don't know, if you've been living under a rock, we have got a massive event coming up on the 8th of June. I'm going to be away for a week before that, so expect a little bit less content. But then we're going to have a 12-hour stream on the 8th of June. We're going to be doing deck booster giveaways. We're going to have lots of giveaways to give, so come and join in the fun. We're going to have some tournament matches, all sorts of fun going on throughout the day. All right, let's dive into this week's meta snapshot. Okay, so as of the 19th of May, I believe that the tier 4 decks for me look something like this. So we've got the Tervagon, Anvir, Gruk, Harken, Sylar, Venomthrope, and Ghazghkull. Now, obviously, Ghazghkull has got quite a good shell, being an Orc warlord, but where Ghazghkull was higher last season was mainly due to Tau being so prevalent and Ghazghkull being a natural drone hunter. Now that's not really the case. Tau have fallen off somewhat, as you're about to see. I do expect Ghazghkull to really not be played at all this season, as he doesn't really have much use over the other Warp bosses. Gruk is still really trying to find a home, as he doesn't really benefit from the Gordrong release and the new cards that came out there. Alright, let's move on. So in tier 3, as you can see, we've had a massive shake-up here. First of all, Onvar, who was last season's top tier deck, has fallen dramatically. That's mainly down to the nerfs that EG obviously implemented early in the season. Not only nerfs to a lot of the Tau meta cards, but also nerfs to Onvar himself. And so Onvar's warlord abilities have become way more expensive. Galaron was an unknown when I last did this snapshot. It was literally the day after that Galaron had come out. I think Galaron still needs some testing. I've got him in tier 3 at the minute. I think he's got I've certainly found one good deck with him, but I don't think that he's found a natural you know, definite kind of like I don't know, like this is the Galaron deck. I don't think we're quite there yet. So for me, he is probably in the tier 3. He's definitely not a dumpster warlord, but not quite on Abaddon's level. Now Tigurius is there because I think that Tigurius, everything Tigurius can do, Calgar feels like can do better, to me anyway. The biggest difference is obviously the health, and when he's going up against the 40 health warlords, Tigurius can be made to pay. Doesn't really have access to much heal unless you run the apothecaries, but mainly people play Tigurius for a vehicle deck, and I've got actually a pretty good vehicle deck to show you with Tigurius in a second. Shadow Sun is actually pretty interesting. Shadow Sun would actually be probably top of tier 2 if it wasn't for that offense card, that horrible offense card that basically makes gives camouflage and essentially just completely negates Markerlight from the game. So that's the main problem that we've got, that Shadow Sun has got, unfortunately, and that is why she's being kept down in tier 3. Otherwise, she has a very good battle suits deck, and she has obviously access to coordinated assault engagement for the automatic hard removals. We do have a pretty good aggro deck with the Terror. Go and watch my videos on that from last season. Again, like with not as much need for the flyers, so to speak. I do still think the ability, or is it called Alpha Warrior? I think Alpha Warrior is insanely powerful still. Don't get me wrong. But again, probably not the top Tyranid deck this season. Now, Zephyr is in tier 3. This could actually well be tier 2 Zephyr, because if you look at the stats, for example, that were reported last season, Zephyr was one of the highest, had actually one of the highest win rates. It was like 3rd or 4th win rate. So I might be being a bit harsh on Zephyr Blade. I feel like with Zephyr Blade, I can't tell you what the Zephyr Blade deck is. I've certainly got Zephyr Blade decks. You can see in my Fire and Fade deck, for example. And the general Eldar Tempo Shell is strong, so maybe you just play that with Zephyr Blade. So I don't really know what the definitive Zephyr Blade deck looks like right now, and he's not sort of super high on the play rate, but he is the legendary, he is the 40 health Warlord in Eldar, and perhaps he's one of the ones that's flying under the radar a little bit. Pardon the pun, he has got a jetbike. Next up, we've got Amesos. Now, Amesos, again, has been hurt because it's a Tau Warlord. A lot of the cards got nerfed. However, Amesos can still bang out some tempo with the ability to put a drone down every turn, including a Vanguard. Amesos is actually not bad, and is definitely pushing that kind of top of tier 3 into bottom of tier 2. So, from tier 3, I'll show you a couple of decks. Here's one from Amesos. This deck's pretty good, actually. It shows up the early game with drones and with the DS8 turret, which didn't get nerfed. And that can lead to a pretty powerful opening, especially if you can get like stealth drone on it or cover the DS8 with a Vanguard. Other than that, you've kind of got the dynamic offensive to draw into the battlesuit. So it's a fairly battlesuit heavy deck, with which of course then come with flank, and that's why we got the technological supremacy as well for healing that up. So still got the AoE. So a lot of stuff hasn't really been hurt too badly by the nerf in this particular build. All right, next up we have Varo. So it's not mine. It's the called it the Teglesiarch version of vehicle deck, and this is a Varo Tarius deck that Ecclesiarch made and had relatively good success with, actually. So if you're looking for a vehicle deck and you really want to play Tigi, then this is your one. One of the nice things, obviously, with Varo is that you're more frequently likely to get things like the battlefield supremacy and get access to your powerful stratagems. And in addition to that, you are also able to trigger codex much more consistently because, you know, if you need an odd number, you can play for the the little ping spell, rather than drawing a stratagem spell. Forgotten what it's called now, but you know what I mean. So there you go. There's a nice Tigerius deck. And then let's look at tier 2. So tier 2 is interesting. I actually think that the Necrons got a major buff with the balance patch this season. And there are 2 Necron Warlords in tier 2, Orikon and Nemesis. I'm going to put Nemesis slightly ahead, mainly because Nemesis' deck is a tempo deck. If you've not seen that yet, then go watch my video on that. It's basically been my second highest win rate this season, this deck. So it's really good for ladder. It's a consistent tempo deck, and it's got lots and lots of intricacies and kind of like player lines in it as well. I really like that deck. Now, the Orikon deck is the best that I've come up with Orikon is a new version of Scarabs, but it's kind of like an artifice deck, actually, because it does run Scarabs to really show up the early game. We all know how annoying and how powerful that can be, but it doesn't rely on them to win the game. So you can transition into like things like Ghost Arcs, and it's even got a monolith in it. So go and check out the Artifice Orikon deck list. It's a really fun one. If you don't draw the right things early on, it can end up getting burst down by super aggro decks, but it's actually pretty good and had a good win rate with this as well. It can be very powerful, and if you don't have the answers to it, you know what, it's Scarabs, right? We all know how annoying that can be. Now, Uriel obviously benefited because of the buffs to to the ultramarines, and I created a Uriel. I called it a wide boy version. You could obviously change some of the cards in there if you wanted to add a little bit more burn, but I basically built a super fast go wide deck with Uriel, and again, it's very powerful. Typical Uriel things, like if it goes off, it's one of the fastest decks in the game, and it can really hurt your opponent. There are a couple of ways you can build him there. Ghazghkull, I'm going to talk about a build for, but Ghazghkull is still there, guys. Everyone's kind of like sleeping on Ghazghkull. Like, everyone seems to have forgotten about him because he did get some nerfs. and he's not quite the powerhouse he once was, but he's still a very, very powerful deck that can give any of the tier 1 decks a run for their money. In fact, Ghazghkull does pretty well against 2 out of 3, or at least 2 of the tier 1 decks. So Ghazghkull's pretty good, I think, right now. Then we got Abaddon. Now, Abaddon has got... He's definitely up there because Abaddon's powerful, and Abaddon's actually got quite a few different ways it can play. So Abaddon can play more late game, it can go with the Murderous Desires kind of combo, sort of mid-rangey, and I also believe that Boogie's been working on more of an aggro version as well. So Abaddon's very powerful with lots of options at the minute, and he's definitely up near the top of tier 2. And finally we got Galen, who, again, I don't know whether Galen's ever going to move out of this spot. She's just kind of like always there at the kind of like top of tier 2. Just a really reliable tempo deck. Yes, she comes unstuck if she doesn't draw the right cards and she gets hit by a really big beefy unit and she's got no way to remove it and she gets stuck. Yeah, that happens. That's a weakness. But outside of that, I mean, her tempo is one of the best in the game still, and it's a very fun deck. So what do some of those tier 2 decks look like? Well, this is that typical tempo deck. Honestly, guys, this deck, you can change a few cards. You could put the Rangers in now if you want for the Veteran Guardians. I think that's a pretty good call if you're not seeing much AoE. Outside of that, I wouldn't really change much, to be honest. It's a very, very solid deck, and yeah, that's not something you can really go wrong with. It does require quite a lot of legendary cards, though, so if you're new, that's one thing to bear in mind if you're thinking of going down the Eldar route. Next up, we got Abaddon. And again, like I said, this is just one of multiple versions. We got the new Galerans champion, the new Malicious Volleys in there. So this deck really is quite good at, again, putting down the tempo, but it's also got some pretty nice removal and some really good late game finish. Also runs a single execution for the big things that we might see. But the Veteran Havocs have been a really nice tempo addition to the faction for sure. Okay, next up we have got... So I told you that Ghazghkull's been slept on. This deck is very, very powerful. It probably is slightly unfavored against Imotekh control, but only slightly. You can definitely beat it, and you know, I think if like the top players play Imotekh and the top players play this, I think Imotekh is slightly favored. But this does very well against Marines. It does very well against Swarmlord. It's a really powerful control deck, and it's still my favorite control deck in the game. Because we're not in the drone meta anymore, we've got rid of some of the kind of like silly kind of AoE stuff that was in there, and we've been able to show up on putting in like more flankers and bring big chopper knob back and things like that. Okay, so tier 1. Tier 1, I have got Gordrang as the warlord that can kind of do a lot of what we just saw from Ghazghkull, but can really shift gears and go much more aggro and beatdown if he wants. So he's just a bit more flexible in those type of matchups where he needs to be the beatdown. He can be. And above Gordrang, I've got Swarmlord, Calgar, and Imotekh. Now, Swarmlord, I'm going to show you the deck for that. It's a big Synapse deck that Shimatsu's piloted into the top 5 this season and is incredibly powerful. One of the things about Swarmlord, it has a very good matchup against Imotekh, and its weakest matches were Tau and like Gaz control. Well, actually, those two aren't being played anymore, so Swarmlord can't believe his luck. You know, Tau have gone away, Gaz got nerfed, no one's playing them. And so Swarmlord suddenly shot up from, I think it was tier 4 last season, or at least near the bottom of tier 3, and he shot up into tier 1. Very, very powerful, very solid deck. I'm going to show you that list in a minute. Manius Calgar is also very effective, benefited loads from the new cards. I've done probably 3 competitive deck lists already. I've done videos for, so go and check them out on my channel. The Big Guard, the really nice vehicle Calgar deck that I feel is very powerful, and if you prefer slightly later game, and also you can just do a more faster paced Codex deck with it as well. And then last but not least, we've got Imotekh, and Imotech's kind of got 2 ways to go. Obviously, it is a control deck. It's probably the control deck right now, but there's kind of 2 builds. You can build it more to deal with the really fast tempo-y decks, or you can build it to kind of be quite greedy and really dominate the late game, and I'll show you both versions. Alright, so the big Synapse deck, the Swarmlord deck that we just talked about, looks like this. This is a very refined deck. There's very little you want to change near, guys. They benefited nicely from the Gargoyle coming in, and some very powerful stratagems in there, right? With this obviously the stealth and the flank, but we have got the, it's not even heal enhanced organism, it's give health too. We've got the recent buff to infinite biomorphologies, and with hardened biology as well. So all very potent abilities, and because we play the Neuraloid in there, we can kind of always get the maximum benefits from the from the synapse on some of these powerful stratagems. So this is a really refined deck, guys. I really wouldn't change much. And also, excitingly, we got the Hive Tyrant in there for any of those games that do go into dragged into late game. Hive Tyrant's super powerful. It's also pretty cool in that if your opponent runs hard removal, which usually costs between like 5 and 7 outside of Orkz, you know, you're not actually falling that far behind on tempo, with 7 being the most expensive unit deck. So this deck slaps Imotekh, by the way, so if you're struggling with Imotekh, then Swarmlord is for you. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Calgar can play several different ways. Here's just like one example of a sort of it's a kind of codex build, really. It's like an early game. It really makes use of these 3 drops, for example, the new Intercessor Sergeant, and it's just a very powerful. It's one of those. It just goes off on curve. Avenging Zeal can kind of just put it through the roof. You can do things like have 2 or 3 units down on the board, and then you that have codex, and then you tactical insight codex them again, and that makes Avenging Seal cost 0 sometimes, so you can then play that immediately, and everything just goes bananas. It's a really powerful deck, and there's a few cards in here that you might want to play around with. Like, some people drop Death from Above and add a couple of extra to the actual head count, if you like. So the exact numbers you can kind of fiddle around with and see what works for you, but this is very much being played near the top of ladder right now. The other version of other versions you can see on my channel, sorry, so the machine deck and the big guard decks, which are also both very powerful. So go and check those out on my channel if you've not seen those videos and deck guides yet. Okay, so in the top of rank 1, as I said, there's kind of 2 builds. I'm calling this one the Ghazghkull. So Ghazghkull, for those who don't know, kind of like the king of Imotekh. He's been playing him forever. He's got like 2,000 games with him, and I've lost him a few times this week. And he's been running this version, surprisingly not making use of the new Immortal Pride. It's just a very effective way of playing control, but keeping up with the tempo and not just being beaten down. So benefiting from having more bodies that are remnant, even things like the Psychomancer now can be reanimated to help you keep up with tempo no matter what you draw. And the Res Orb as well for that kind of surprise turn where you can suddenly get multiple things back. It's almost like a mini Tomb World in a way. So this is what Ghazghkull's running right near the top of ladder, and again, if you want to be able to deal with tempo, then this is the version to go with. The other version, if you want to try out some of the newer cards from the buff, I've kind of got this one from the Ecclesiarch. There's other versions. I know Barrick's been running something similar. It's a question of whether you win the 1-drops or not. But this is a slightly more greedy version. So you can see we go more for the late game, so that we run the Immortal Prides to get the shield, to get the armor, sorry, and then we run the things like Double Conquering Tyrant, which not only does it give you 10 heal, but you can imagine that Imotech's now got 6 melee attacks. So things like, you know, Terror, things like Abaddon, things like Gordrang, these sort of melee damaging units, and Warlords just can't attack into you when you've got 6. So obviously we've got the double Methodicals and the usual kind of Necron Lord, Tomb World, and Oberon for the end game. So yeah, that's how I see the current meta snapshot, guys. Hope that was helpful. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget about the 8th of June if you want to come along and join the stream. I'll be on Twitch and YouTube, so love to see you there. We'll be starting 1 PM BST. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.